There were a lot of action games released throughout the early 2000s, probably too many to actually count. And while many games set industry standards for years to come, plenty more have proven to be mostly forgettable. If anyone remembers Freedom Fighters developed by IO Interactive, then you might recall that this game had plenty of potential to spawn an acclaimed video game series, yet fell short in the long run. Released in 2003 under EA Games, Freedom Fighters was set in an alternate history where the Cold War didn't happen, and the Soviet Union set about a path to dominate most of the free world. If you've seen films like Red Dawn or The Manchurian Candidate, then you'll be familiar with this premise of the world suddenly coming to a halt as red soldiers drop out of the sky. Only instead of occupying a small mountain town, they invade New York City, a city that more than anything symbolizes capitalism, at least to the Reds. Events center around the actions of the main character, Christopher Stone, once a mild-mannered plumber who gets mixed up with the insurgent elements and instantly becomes the leader of a resistance movement. Freedom Fighters was first announced back in May of 2002, and it was originally named the Battle for Liberty Island. Originally, the game involved a simple turn-based strategy as a major element of gameplay, but given the popularity of more action-based shooters at the time, more focus was placed on incorporating more action-oriented gameplay. Our story begins in New York City as we are greeted by two plumbers on their way to a job, Christopher Stone and his brother Troy Stone, who received a call to look at the plumbing of a local political activist and propagandist, Isabella Angelina. Upon arriving to her city apartment, the Red Army launches a surprise raid on the building in hopes of capturing Isabella, but instead of arresting her, they arrest Troy Stone, and Chris is left in the room alone. Meanwhile, Red Army soldiers are gathering up people and arresting them in the hallway, and Chris decides to intervene. In the first 2 minutes of the game, players are introduced to the tutorials through the first couple of missions. In this first mission, you help a few resistance leaders retreat back to the sewers. In this mission, you learn the basic combat and healing controls, along with how to use explosives. Before you know it, you reach the sewers, and since Chris is a plumber, he can use his trusty monkey wrench to open up the manhole covers that access the sewers. The sewers will serve as your main rebel base, at least for now. From here, you can access different parts of the city depending on what stage you're on. The story of the game then moves to Chris sabotaging key Soviet facilities and capturing key areas of the city to allow him to build up a resistance network. So, story-wise, Freedom Fighters doesn't really do anything to draw the player in or make them feel any way invested on what's going on. The characters couldn't be more uninteresting. Although they do give you some good information related to your objectives, I just feel like their personalities could have been a little bit more fleshed out.
Check this out. I found out where they got a Soviet elite training facility. It's in the high school. Take it back and cancel the classes, dog, for real. From what I hear, they keep political prisoners there for interrogation, too. I say we bust them out, do all that, and we'll be living gangster. This is it, fellas. Governor's Island. The baddest boys in red are holed up in here, waiting for backup. We ain't alone either. I've got guys hollering at me from all around the states telling me that everyone's planning a major blow-up on the Reds all at once. We gotta show up, too. But they're dug in tight up in here, man. Oh, I'm talking heavy guns, minefields, artillery. But the real deal is here, Fort J. Now this is where they control the subs and those nukes they're carrying.
Oh man, we've already been there once. We gotta sail out there again? They've got Isabella. If we move on them now, they'll just waste her. We don't want that. Heck, we control most of New York. Can't we wait till they leave? You know what I'm saying? Like, let them go home, just leave the back door open, let them slip out quietly.
Most of the story, if there is any, is told through a more than hilarious news broadcast, which also acts as a source of propaganda for the masses. Each of these news broadcasts will cover your actions as a resistance fighter, along with acting as some of the only real cutscenes of the game. It's clear that IO Interactive didn't want to bog players down with a long cutscene or exposition for what's going on, and this is one of the first of many problems that Freedom Fighters suffered from: the lack of a decent story or narrative. Rather, most of the story just boils down to defeating the Reds and taking back New York City. We are never given any explanation as to why the Reds are invading in the first place, or to what their larger motivations in the long run might be.
I am Chris Stone, the so-called Freedom Phantom. I stand before you today a free man, and I vow to die a free man. Like you, my world was shattered 8 long months ago. I watched as my family and friends were tortured, captured, and killed. I have nothing left of my former life, except the hope for a better future. A better future for our children. The American dream. I, for one, still believe in that dream.
Gameplay-wise, Freedom Fighters incorporates a decent enough set of controls and solid third-person shooter gameplay. With flexible controls, you can shoot from the hip or raise your weapon for more precise firing that activates a over-the-shoulder view. For decent inventory, the player can equip a primary weapon and a secondary handgun, along with multiple explosives and health packs. Weapons include assault rifles, shotguns, pistols, machine guns, along with special weapons like the M60 and rocket launcher. During missions, you can freely swap out weapons whenever you come across a new one. Gameplay here very much plays as seen in the non-stealth portions of the Hitman games. Like in Hitman, the console versions for the game will feature an auto-aim feature. If you have the PC version, then you'll use the mouse cursor to aim. Having originally played this game on the PlayStation 2, I have to say that the PC version feels much better and smoother, as the mouse wheel can select weapons with an easy click and pick radius, while the right mouse button works for aiming purposes, and the number keys work to issue squad commands, which I'll get into now. After learning the basic controls, players are given the ability to command squad mates of resistance fighters. The number depends on your charisma level, which can increase based on the completion of primary and secondary objectives. Primary objectives revolve around securing key locations and raising up the American flag, while secondary objectives include acts of sabotage or freeing enemy prisoners, along with killing the occasional civilian you find. These objectives are marked on the map, and as you advance through the game, you are encouraged to use a little thinking to how you'll complete them. Getting back to these squad commands, this is one of the more impressive aspects of Freedom Fighters. In most cases, video game AI isn't always the most reliable, but in Freedom Fighters, squad AI is done fairly well. Squad mates are controlled with the use of 3 commands, those being attack, defend, and retreat. You can issue individual commands to your squad mates, or by simply holding down the command button, issue the command to the entire squad. Regardless of the danger, squad mates will run directly into it. And in cases where you need to defend, they will find what cover is the most convenient for them. However, squad mate AI isn't perfect, as sometimes troops will get stuck in attempting to climb down or climb up objects, and in some cases will even go alternative paths on their own. But this is pretty rare, and for the most part, squad mates will do what they can to support each other and you. While I did enjoy commanding multiple resistance fighters, as it did make for some lively gun battles, it would have been nice to see a little bit more strategy added here. None of the resistance fighters are really that different from each other than the weapon they might use. There was no focus on stats or special abilities that might have given the player a slight edge in battle. Basically, you just pick from groups of interchangeable fighters that do little to stand out ability-wise. I guess this doesn't take away from the squad dynamics, but it would have been nice to see some more customizable features, such as unlocking new squad mates with more special abilities, or increasing their health over the long run. Stuff like that. Now let's talk a little bit more about these objectives yet to complete. Each mission in the game has one main goal, but that goal is hard to complete without completing the secondary missions. For instance, in later missions, your progress is hindered by an attack helicopter covering your position and shooting down on you. You'll have to find C4 in another location in order to destroy the helipad to remove all the choppers from the area. Another example can be found towards the beginning of the game upon entering the police station. You can't make your way out there without first dealing with the snipers held up on the rooftops of a nearby gas station. Once again, you have to travel to find C4 and blow up the gas station. Objectives such as these are achieved through using the sewer system once again. Anyone else getting a Super Mario vibe here? A plumber traveling around the sewers to fight evil? Real original. Anyway, this is another thing that Freedom Fighters gets right, allowing the player to move freely through the different maps of the game via the sewers, which also conveniently act as save points. Other than destroying objects, the secondary objectives are limited. I can't help but think that some more additional game features could have been added in the squad-based tactics game like this one. Why weren't there missions that had you defending a recently captured location from a red attack? I mean, sure, they hosted the flag up there, but what's to keep the Reds from invading that location once again? Also, why weren't there any missions added for pulling off some more political assassinations? The one political assassination that you end up doing in the game is pretty dull, honestly. While you are encouraged to use some stealth to get to your target, in the long run you just end up with a long drawn out gunfight. Look, I don't mean to complain so much, but sometimes the missions in Freedom Fighters just feel a little too hashed on. As good as Freedom Fighters might have been when it came out, it just didn't have enough replay value. The player doesn't earn anything for completing objectives other than a boost to their charisma, and the game doesn't provide anything in the way of unlockable items or special levels. Completing the game simply just gives you the ability to go back and play any mission at your leisure, and that's it. Given the setting and the gameplay, this particular third-person shooter could have been the first game of an acclaimed video game series. I think what it boils down to is that Freedom Fighters just wasn't a game that got a lot of attention. At the time when Freedom Fighters was being announced, IO Interactive had just finished up Hitman 2 Silent Assassins and were well on their way to releasing a version for the Nintendo GameCube. While there were a few game trailers seen on TV, the game, other than an episode of X-Play, really didn't get much exposure. I even think it's possible that the entire marketing budget for the game was fairly low compared to IO's Hitman series. And for that matter, it might not be a stretch to say that this particular game was streamlined during the development stage. That would explain the relatively short campaign, which can be completed in around 10 to 12 hours. It would also explain the more than simplified narrative, which strongly lacked depth or significant character development. And how about the unexplored features, such as the addition of different squad types and abilities, or customizable options that would have worked to enhance the player's experience? I do think it would be a serious stretch to claim that this game's development was rushed, as if you look past the many critiques which I presented in this video, it isn't the case at all. Freedom Fighters featured well-executed core mechanics, a balance of strategy and action, and more fundamentally, a proper setting for a third-person action game. One can really appreciate the work that went into turning New York City into a free-roaming battle zone filled to the brim with barricades and fortifications. And what truly stands out are the sounds of the urban landscape as you travel through the many streets and alleyways of the city. These sounds pair well with the wonderful soundtrack composed by Jasper Kidd. They combine to make an inviting ambiance. This is one particular game that I would have loved to see turn into a successful video game series. All the components were there for a stronger and more compelling narrative, and a well-designed and integrated setting, and key mechanics which would have provided plenty of strategy. But as you know, this would never happen, as by 2004, when talks of the sequel for Freedom Fighters were in discussion, IO Interactive would be purchased and become under the control of Eidos, and plans for the Freedom Fighters 2 video game would be put on the shelf for games such as Hitman Blood Money. While fans will never see a sequel, we can still appreciate the work that went into Freedom Fighters. As the game, despite the many critiques I've given you in this video, is still worth playing today. That concludes this retrospective look at Freedom Fighters. If you enjoyed learning more about the classic video games of the 6th console generation, then make sure you subscribe to Smoking Fiend Productions. This is your big homie Bob signing off. Thank you for watching and stay safe out there. Peace.
Everything I said was lies. They forced me, Chris. Don't believe this stinking propaganda. Keep fighting. Set us all free.